Well, welcome. My name is Stephen Wood. I am the director of the Center for Law and the Environment. Welcome to the second webinar in a series of webinars called Towards Legal Recognition for Non-Human Relations. The second webinar deals with supernatural beings and sacred places. It follows the first webinar we held in September, which looked at rivers. And the third webinar, which will take place in January on a date to be set, will deal with non-human species. So yes, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Center for Law and the Environment, the UBC Sustainability Office, and the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. All of us are co-sponsoring this series of webinars. Where I am at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, Coast Salish peoples. And really, the landscape around us, where we are privileged to be uninvited guests, is alive with ancestors of those nations. And just to start us off, I'll give you two very brief examples that are in the public domain. There's the young new father who was so determined to purify and cleanse himself to be a good parent that he defied the giants, the gods, who ordered him to move out of the way of their canoe. The gods were so impressed by that they gave him immortal life, transforming him into a rock, which stands on the shore in what is now called Stanley Park in Vancouver, and close by his beloved wife and child are living immortally as rocks on the shore. Another example would be the two daughters of a great chief who interceded with their father in a time of war to convince him to invite the enemy to a potlatch, thereby sealing the great peace amongst coastal First Nations of what's now called British Columbia that is still enjoyed to this day. And for that, they were given everlasting life as the two stunning mountain peaks that you can see from just about anywhere in Vancouver, bathed in golden sunlight and known as the Two Sisters. So the webinar today is scheduled to take an hour. We would invite you to ask questions at any time by using the Q&A function in the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. You don't have to wait until everyone is done to do that. Go ahead at any time. When our speakers are done, we'll open up the Q&A. And the other thing I would say is that this session is being recorded and will be available publicly on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it simply by visiting the center's website. With that, I hope I haven't forgotten anything preliminary. I'm going to hand the reins over to our moderator for today, Megan Robinson, who is a PhD candidate in interdisciplinary studies here at the University of British Columbia. Thanks very much. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Stephen. Kia ora tātou, Sachana Lia for joining us today. My name is Megan Robinson. Ko maunga te chich eliwich, ko awa te kiwa, ko whakapapa te Ruan, County Mayo, Ireland, and Robinson, Scotland. My mountain is Chech Iliwich, my waters is the Pacific, my ancestral lines are Rowan of County Mayo, Ireland, and Robinson of Scotland. It is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce today's knowledge holders for our second webinar, Towards Legal Recognition for Non-Human Relations, Supernatural Beings and Sacred Places. Trevor Mack is from the lakes, rivers, and mountains of Clede Nkoch of the Tailkotin. Trevor is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, producer, and director whose last film, Portraits from a Fire, premiered at the 2021 Vancouver International Film Festival. And our other guest from Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, Dr. Jacinta Ruru. Rarangi maunga tutonu, rarangi tangata, ngaronoa naonoa. Ko te kupu, ko te atua, ko ranginui ki raro, ko papatu nuku ki runga, ka mate ai te tangata, ka pō ka ao awatea, Maori ora. Dr. Jacinta Ruru is Raukawa, Ngati Ranginui, and Ngati Maniapoto. She is a professor of law at the University of Otago and the co-director of Napai o Te Maramatanga, Aotearoa's Maori Center for Research Excellence. Without further ado, I welcome Trevor to our virtual stage.
Oh, hola, man, a bilingual introduction. That was beautiful. Nakwasachena Megan. And Nakwasachena for this opportunity. Sitso Z, Trevor Mack, Tlerin Ko, Deninislin, Sitso Z, Sinquel, Bozi, Barbara Mack, Setsuin, Bozi, Imam Mack kindly, Setsiin, Maxine Mack kindly, Tsaikotin. My name is Trevor Mack. I come from a place that's called Tlerin Ko, which means plateau by the river. And the river that I speak of is Tsaiko, is Choco River. My mother is Barbara Mack. My grandmother is Imam Mack, and my grandfather is Maxine Mack. And those are the Tsaikotin ancestors in my family. And I also have Polish ancestry as well. And so I'm very honored to have been asked to speak and learn from this panel. And I'm actually, before I even begin, I'm going to start with some blessings from an elder in our nation. And this is a little video. It's got a little bit of relevance to sacred places. So I'm just going to get this ready here. All right. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. And, okay.
Hi, my name is Nalbas. My mom called me Nalbas. But then I was named for the system, and I'm called Gilbert Solomon. I'm honey in. Because I've been born in honey, I have this feeling for the mountains. I could feel their spirit. I could feel the information that they're giving me when I need them, like the most important times of my life, you know. When I was like 23 years old, I started drinking, fell into that place, and I needed help. Then I discovered a cremation site I brought back some broken arrows to my parents. I showed it to them, and they had this look on their face saying, "Where did you get that?" And I said, I described the place, and I said, "You know what, that's cremation site." And I said, "Oh, that's why I have in these dreams." Then I went back to that site with tobacco, and I said, "I want to help you now, and help the people." Yeah, but I can't do it because I'm hurting myself, you know, self-inflicted, you know, oblivious of doing that. But when I gave offering to that place, yeah, they took that away from me. Took the alcohol, you know, the cigarette, the snooze, you know. From there, I start helping myself at that time. So we're trying to heal ourselves. We're trying to find our way, and we discover we have this nice, beautiful, powerful place way back here in Chalcolec, like south end of Chalcolec. You see the beautiful, powerful mountains here. You don't have to do no medicine or anything here. You just be here. Mountain itself just healing you. So the glaciers up there, we call that flute, you know. It's there for all of us, for everything, you know, for all plant life. So this mountains, very important because they keep giving us water. So we come down here to this island to help people, to help wake you up. It don't take just like tomorrow, you know. It takes a while to deprogram, you know. Like all the ceremonies that we want to continue from our ancestors, the songs that our elders taught us. We want to do that because it makes us feel whole, you know, like we want to honor. We need to honor this planet that we coexist, all humans. Because I want to help everybody to help waken up the real. It's you're real.
So it was now boss Gilbert Solomon, who's a respected elder in our nation, in our communities. And that trip was about introducing the sacredness of our territory, of our mountains, of our waters, specifically in that trip to his granddaughters. And it was a beautiful, beautiful trip. And so that's the question, right? The legal recognition of our sacred areas, whether there are mountains, Tail Os, Ini Yud, whether there are rivers, Taich Ko, Dasi Ko. What we have right now is a situation where the youth in our communities and communities, Indigenous communities, Ninkaini communities all across Canada, we're in this state of remembering because of what's happened to us. It's been within us all along, but now we're in a state of, okay, remembering. And in now Boss and Gilbert's situation, and in many others, this has come from, the remembering has come from a relationship with the plants, with the plant medicine. So we were a part of a trip where we went to a sacred mountain in our territory, Tail Os. And that story is about Tail Os was once a man, and he had a wife in Iniyut, and they were separated, and Iniyut took her 3 daughters across a valley, and Tail Os stayed with his 3 sons, and they turned into the mountains. And Iniyut is with her daughters planting potatoes, a tunnel chat. And Tylos is there in the glaciers with his three sons. And so we went up there in a trek, in an expedition to lay down medicines for offerings and to gather Tylos's sacred water, Databentu, from source, the glacial water from source, and bring back down to the community. And we did. We had 2 scouting trips. And that is the goal, to bring youth along the trip next year. And so along that trip, a song was created, and every single day we got to learn the language. We got to learn the language every single new day, because new things were happening. And we had knowledge carriers with us who knew the stories of Tylos, and knew the stories of the land. And so along the way, we had help, whether they was through the medicines, the plant medicines, no soap berries, thick Saskatoon berries, eating the berries, but also other plant medicines as well. Hickory, it may be called, or peyote, or mushrooms. Peyote is used by Ninkaini to help on long expeditions and treks to stay energized. And psilocybin mushrooms is help with grounding and helping us resonate with each other. So I think when we're looking at land recognition and legal rights recognition of sacred areas, we're in a state right now where the songs that we sing, we have to start resonating within our own communities and within our own peoples on, okay, what does sacred mean? You know, what does sacred feel like? We need to, and so what does that feel like? And this is where we're able to contextualize help from plant medicines on cultural trips, such as the one we've taken. We're able to remember the sacredness of our areas, and remembering by the act of feeling that sacredness. And so when we're looking at environmental rights, when we're looking at the future protections of our land and the hopeful legal recognitions of our areas, you know, we're looking at being able to combine medicines from the 4 directions, bringing medicine carriers from other Ninkaini communities who still use these medicines to tangibly communicate with their sacred and supernatural beings, and to help contextualize that within cultural traditions of each communities. So we have 600 communities, Indigenous communities across Canada. They all have songs, ceremonies, dances, in order to honor supernatural beings, the cosmos, the land, the waters, the mountains. And so in that process, we can heal our communities and we can focus on healing for the new generation. And when these plant medicines, these sacred plant medicines, some call it psychoactive, psychedelic plant medicines, some call it sacraments, but when these plant medicines are then utilized with the healing of our people, the governance and the ceremonies, this is where these declarations are going to be coming from the fire of these weaved together traditions of Ninkaini from the north, south, east, and west. And that re-remembering of the sacred within our own communities will lead to the enacting of our traditional laws from a place of experiential knowledge, from the place of that feeling of the sacred. And so that's something that is a vision that's come from people far wiser than me, that's come from now boss Gilbert Solomon, that's come from several other elders that I've been learning from. And so when we're looking at the future protection of our peoples, it's the re-remembering of sacred, because when we're declaring something sacred, and perhaps it's in a context of a Western colonial justice system, you know, we have to be on the same wavelength of what sacred feels like, what sacred means. So in the process of weaving together plant medicines and traditional ceremonies from our communities, the non-Indigenous people will begin to also have that experiential feeling of what sacred is, because they will be included in on these ceremonies. And so that's something that I feel I'm super excited to witness, to be a part of the combination of visions from the south, from the north, from the east, and from the west. And, you know, to have these within these ceremonies, the traditional laws of our territories becoming manifested through song, through the resonance that our youth will sing together. And that's going to come from that experiential feeling of sacred that we experience on these healing medicines, combined with culturally contextualized ceremonies, songs, dances, and being out on the land. And so in that remembering is these declarations of the future will come from and create this beautiful, beautiful textile piece, this weaved, beautiful piece of the shared visions of the future from Ninkaini all across the world. And so, and I hope you enjoyed the songs that now boss Gilbert Solomon has sung, because he's an embodiment of the defiance, of the perseverance of our people, of going through what he's gone through, going through what Ninkaini all across the world have gone through, and then having found solace and peace through plant medicines and being out on the land, and the vision that can inspire new generations. And so, yeah, thank you very much.
So Chanalia, Trevor. And now to introduce Jacinta Ruru. Tēnā koe, Dr. Ruru.
Oh, tēnā koe, Megan. Again, thank you so much for that incredible bilingual introduction, honouring our te ao Māori, our Māori world here in Aotearoa in New Zealand. I really felt that. So thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to be here. And Trevor, wow, that was an incredible presentation. And sort of sitting here thinking, I want to throw away all my notes and just now talk about our stories of our maunga, our mountains. But I think I'm just going to run through my presentation. I really hope that we can, in future, have some more continuing conversations around this. I feel very moved from your presentation, and I'm really honoured to be here today. So, well, tēnā koutou katoa. So greetings to everyone who's watching today. Nā mihi nui ki te mana whenua o te rā. So to the mana whenua, the people of the lands there, the coastal English peoples, I greet you. And I thank you for this opportunity to share a little about how settler law in Aotearoa, New Zealand is beginning to recognise who we are as Māori in our full sense of humanness. And Trevor, I really enjoyed that video. I enjoyed the whole video clip, but that little part at the end where your main speaker, the elder there, said around honouring this planet and awakening the real you. And and for me, I suppose I've pitched my talk around the sense of humanness and from a Māori perspective, what that means to be human. So it's well known that colonial settler laws around the world have done an enormous amount of damage to destroy and disrupt Indigenous peoples' intergenerational responsibilities of environmental care and use. And I'm intensely interested in how settler law can begin to empower rather than terminate Indigenous Māori ownership and governance of lands and waters and coastlines. So in this country, some innovation to decolonise settler law is evident, both in our legislation and in our court judgments. The innovation is emerging because the settlers' legal system is beginning to decolonise itself by listening to Māori ideas of law, relationships and values. And so I'm turning to my talk and sharing my presentation. So in turning to my talk, I applaud and honour the intellectualism, bravery and resilience of my Māori ancestors in relations then and now. And let me start by sharing a little about me. My father grew up in his father's tribal nation lands of Rokawa, which is the middle of the North Island. I'm not sure if you can see my little around here. Next door to our humble Te Apunga Paparamu Marae, bookended by his mother's peoples, my grandmothers, the Ormsbys of Ngāti Ranganui and Ngāti Maniapoto. My Pākehā European mother grew up to the west of my dad in her beloved city, New Plymouth, where her grandparents had travelled from England to make their home here. And I grew up in the Ngaitahu tribal lands in the South Island, in the far south at the lakehead of Lake Wakatipu, the remote Glenorchy, at the foot of the majestic Mount Hounslow, the braided waters of the Dart River, surrounded by lands protected in the renowned Fiordland and Mount Aspiring National Parks, managed by our Department of Conservation, similar to your Parks Canada. That's quite critical. Here in New Zealand, 1/3 of our country is locked up in our conservation estate, an enormous amount of lands and waters. Something seemed terribly amiss and remiss. Wasn't I also living in the stolen lands of Ngaitahu, at the head of the sleeping giant on the boat that Maui used to catch the big fish that the Europeans named the North Island? And wasn't I living near to the trails of the most precious traded resource in the Māori economy, greenstone, or pounamu, a place deep with centuries of Māori history and knowledge? But none of this was visually evident in the mostly overlaid English place names of my childhood home. This childhood unease led me on to dream for better, more respectful ways to acknowledge Māori history, stories and interests, to remain stewards of our lands and waters as central to our cultural identity and survival. And I ended up in the study of law. So law hasn't been kind to Indigenous peoples. It has silenced, stolen and criminalised much of what is dear to us. When I began my law studies, the settler law of New Zealand had done little to see our Māori humanness. Our settler law did not know that Auraki, who they called Mount Cook, after Captain James Cook, and is our highest mountain in the country, Auraki is the son of Whanganui, the Sky Father. He and his brothers travelled down in a waka on a boat trying to find our Earth Mother, and they couldn't find her, and they said a prayer incorrectly, and they hit a hidden reef, and their whole waka, their boat and them scrambled to the top, and they now form our Southern Alps that run down the spine of the South Island. And there's so much more I could say about Auraki. He's Taranaki. He's a male mountain, personified as a male mountain. He had this big battle in the central part of the North Island with Tongariro, another male mountain, over a beautiful female mountain, Pihama. And it's said that different tribal nations will tell the stories differently, but one story is that Taranaki lost this battle, and that's why he sits, he's banished over onto the west coast of the North Island all by himself. this huge maunga, this huge mountain. And in his flee from this battle, he partly carved some of the Whanganui River, which has become world famous now, which is our third longest river. And the settler law did not know that our Māori legal system was and is based in relationships. At its core, our legal system is about our responsibilities to one another as humans, as descendants of Papa Tūnuku, our Earth Mother, and Sky Father, Ranganui, as relatives of our mountains, our rivers, our birds, and our plants. After all, hundreds of years ago, the Europeans dreamed up their desire to expand their empires across salt waters and created a settler legal system that made sense to them. They developed a new legal doctrine, the doctrine of discovery. It holds that European countries can gain sovereignty of another's lands on the basis of first discovery, even if other people live there. This is one of the greatest examples of the magic of law, I think. The Europeans made up the law to suit their desire to expand their control of the world order. And it happened then, and it still continues. But if law is this powerful, and if law can do anything, what now do we want it to do? And by knowing that law, or settler law, is biased, we have agency to make real our dreams in both a practical and constitutional manner. And so our campaigns to revitalise legal recognition and protection for our non-humans, our non-human relations, has been Māori-led. From 1840 onwards, we have had Māori activism calling for the recognition of who we are as a people. And I'm just going to play you, hopefully I can make this work. Hone Tūwhare is one of our now, he's passed away, but he's one of our greatest Māori poets. And he wrote this poem here in honour of Papa Tūnuku, our Earth Mother, just after 1975. He and thousands of other Māori walked from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the North Island, Wellington, so over thousands of miles, quite kilometres. And Hone walked barefoot that whole way, and they all held these placards, "Not one more acre of Māori land." It was a huge protest against society and government for the taking of our Māori land. And so if I can very quickly change my share screen, and you can hear Hone speak this poem, which I think is really powerful.
Papa Tūnuku, and that's to our Earth Mother, whom we call Papa Tūnuku. We are stroking, caressing the spine of the land. We are massaging the wrecked back of the land with our sore but ever-loving feet. Hell, she loves it. Squirming, the land wriggles in delight. Ah, we love her.
And so part of this talk today is really to honour Papa Tūnuku, our Earth Mother. Right, I want to come back to my PowerPoint presentation. So Māori activism, negotiating the Treaty of Waitangi settled under our Claimed Settlement Act. So through this activism, our settler legislation is now starting to recognise in law our Māori humanness. So from 1998, this is the Ngaitahu Claimed Settlement Act, it recognises now in settler law that Auraki is an ancestor, that he is a descendant of Ranganui, our Sky Father, and the law now recognises that. Probably more in a more famous way, our law now recognises this huge forested area in the North Island as being that heart of that great fish that we said that Maui fished up. So it's quite extraordinary, and this is using the legal personality tool. Again, that legal personality tool is being used here with the Whanganui River, that third longest river. Here, the law now recognises this river as an ancestor, and soon Taranaki, remember that male mountain that didn't quite, who didn't win that battle, that love battle, he's now about to be recognised as an ancestor. So these developments are leading me to ask myself these three questions. If we see and hear as a nation Māori environmental ancestors, what do we do in response? If our colonial dominated current constitutional orders are no longer fit for purpose, what better orders do we dream for? And how do we seek to make right the rules of our country to enable well-being into the future? Megan, I can't see how many more minutes I've got left, but I imagine I'm running closely out, am I?
You have 8 minutes left.
8. Oh, good. Cool. Thank you. So the possibilities for change excite me. And in this whole quest, I argue that the discipline of law matters, and right now lies one of our greatest opportunities for positive transformation of society and conservation and environmental law, if we're willing to go on this journey. And this possibility excites me, but only if we could be truly brave. To me, brave means overhauling all of our legislation here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, including our legal and our governance structures. So, for example, I'm keeping with this theme of conservation. So inserted into Section 4 in our Conservation Act in 1987, so more than 30 years ago, was a commitment, or actually a mandatory requirement to give effect to our principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which recognises Māori self-determination and Māori rights of ownership of our lands and treasures. So by just reading Section 4, you would think nearly 35 years on that we would have a system of conservation management that is at least bicultural in power sharing, bicultural in science and Māori science application, and bilingual in expression. We don't. This point has been made forcefully by others for a long time, including the Waitangi Tribunal 10 years ago, when it stressed that partnership is the intellectual framework for understanding the treaty. And I quote, "The Department of Conservation must be looking for partnership opportunities in everything that it does. Opportunities to share power with Māori should be a core performance indicator for the department, rather than the exceptional outcome driven by the wider pressures of treaty settlements." But our current conservation law has been born of a time when policymakers and government members were heavily influenced by the Western conservation ideals of the 19th and earlier 20th centuries. This law has at its heart an English colonial idea of conservation. Our conservation and environmental law is mostly silent on things Māori, and I would go further in saying it is hostile to Māori leadership and our Māori knowledge and our Māori humanness. So don't be fooled to think that we have it all sorted here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are glimmers of hope. And I'm going to now move to Te Ururoa, which is that settlement that took place in 2014, that use of that legal personality to remove a large national park from our conservation estate and recognise it as its own personal entity. And through that, Māori, Tūhoi, the tribal nation of that area, got the pen to be able to write the plan to care for that area. And this is Te Kawa o Te Ururoa, and I think it's one of the very best examples of writing in the English language, and I'm going to quote a little bit from it. So Te Kawa o Te Ururoa reads like no other national park management plan I've ever read. It deliberately sets out to disrupt the norm. It strives to manage people for the benefit of the land rather than manage the land for the benefit of people. It is a remarkable document and embraces a process of unlearning, rediscovery and relearning to seize the truth expressed by our beliefs. The reorientation of the plan is stated as, and I'm quoting here, deliberatively, we are resetting our human relationship and behaviour towards nature. Our disconnection from Te Ururoa has changed our humanness. We wish for its return. And so embraced in this plan and all decisiveness, we are returning to our place in nature as her child. This plan knows that the answers to biodiversity well-being lie intimately within the lands themselves if we listen carefully. And again, quoting, nature speaks all the time and is understood only by the sincere observer and heedful mind and heart. Humanity has much to gain from reigniting a responsibility to Te Ururoa, for within these customs and behaviours lies the answers to our resilience to meet a forever changing climate. Through committing to Te Ururoa values, we are innovating our instincts and adjusting our behaviour to ensure a prosperous future that is secure. So Te Kawa o Te Uruwera exemplifies all that is possible when stolen lands are returned, and the solution of legal personality exemplifies how innovative state law can be if it wishes to be. This re-empowerment through power back demonstrates the possibilities of flourishing futures. Through the return of power, our love as Māori for Papatūānuku, our Earth Mother, can become less constrained, more free, because we're once again able to massage her ridges by walking in movement, knowing we are re-empowered to care for her. And this care can once again entail heavy responsibilities to decision make, and this is good. So just in my final few minutes, that's enormous legislative change is happening. There's also some incredible work that's taking place by our courts. In some ways, our courts are finally starting to catch up. Some of this work has been led by one of our Māori judges, who's now been appointed to our highest court. And in his extrajudicial role, he's done a lot of writing around our Māori law, and he's labelled this Māori law our Kupe law, the law of Kupe. And then he talks about Captain James Cook and the English law that came as Cook's law. And he's talking about how we're going to make this new law for Aotearoa New Zealand that weaves together both Kupe and Cook's law, and he calls this Lex Aotearoa. And so we as a country are really embedded right now in a major movement in recognising our Māori laws, and our judges are starting to move alongside us in this. And this is just a recent decision that came out only a couple of weeks ago, well, this year. And I'm really interested in here, and I don't have time really to go through it, but you can see and hear the judges now are talking about Papatūānuku and Whanganui. They're talking about our Māori law, our tikanga, is recognising these as ancestors, and that we do not own our ancestors. And that how we connect to one another as humans is incredibly important. So I wish to share that with you. And I might leave it there, except to say we do have a plan for the whole positive disruption transformation of Aotearoa New Zealand, and this plan lies in He Puapua, which a small group of us were appointed by our Minister of Māori Development to draft together an action plan, which I think Canada has already started to do some of these action plans in the context of the putting into effect the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is our plan. It's only just publicly been released, and it's been politicized and not going very far. But anyway, we call for a major change in powers of spheres of influence. And you can see that this here is a message for what more, particularly people who are interested in Indigenous voices. And this is from a Māori perspective. We're calling for people to read our Māori authored work. So I'll leave it there. Kia ora, thank you very much.
Tēnā koe, Sachanalia, Trevor, Jacinta. Thank you so much for your talks today. It's been amazing, incredible to listen to you two. And now we're going to go and head to questions. We have 20 minutes worth of question and answers. So anyone that wishes to ask a question to either Jacinta, Trevor, both, feel free to write it in the question and answer box. And then I will ask it for you once I can find where the question and answer box is. I may need your help with this one, Stepan. I'm not sure I can see where the Q&A. Here we go. None quite yet, but if anyone, I can, oh, I see we have a hand from myself, which I'm guessing is my dad. So Doug Robinson is on. Do you want to ask your question first of all? You have to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me, Megan?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I wish to thank both of the speakers. That was an incredible journey for someone like myself, who's probably as westernized and as unfamiliar with this topic that you both talked about. For Jacinta, I was wondering how you have Sir William, and I might not be describing him or have his name right. How many Maori judicial folks do you have on your courts?
We're starting to get, the numbers are starting to increase slowly. We have one Maori on our top court, that's Justice Joe Williams. And then really only, if you look down at our lower appeal courts, only list like one or two, particularly very few who actually speak Te Reo Māori with any confidence and so on. But look, there's a lot of the new appointments of judges are Māori who are coming into our lower courts, our district court, our family courts and so on. So there's a movement that's happening. But though, yeah, so very few Māori judges overall, though. We, of course, do have a Māori land court, and that is mostly now Māori judges that sit on that Māori land court. And again, that's something that's happened over the last 20, 30 years. And we have very few Māori lawyers as well as a percentage, and then we have very few Māori students coming through law, and we wish to really increase those numbers, because right now it is our Māori lawyers and our Māori students and so on that can help influence in a very positive way our legal system. And our legal system's really receptive right now to hearing about our Māori laws and being influenced in how that law can help shape a better, just legal system for all of us in this country.
Thank you. Is there a move then, or how strong is the movement among the Maori youth to take up this and use the law and the changing of the law to try and affect this change? Is it something that's gaining, or is it, or folks like yourself? I guess my question also is, how did you come to the law?
Look, I think there is a big movement, just as Megan, how you beautifully introduced it in a very bilingual way. We're making at the moment some really big calls for our whole legal system to be bicultural. So the whole makeup of our judicial system, our law schools, our law students should be, Māori should be very present throughout all that, and in decision-making roles as well, and roles of being able to determine budgets and all sorts. So in a very bicultural way, we're calling for bilingual. Māori is an official language of New Zealand and has been for 30 or so years, but it's not regarded in that way like you have with French and English in Canada. So Māori hasn't been given that same kind of practical emphasis. So we've got a lot of work to do there. And then we're also calling for a bijural legal system. And there's a lot of movement towards that. And by bijural, we mean the strong recognition that the first laws of this country were Māori laws, and those Māori laws continue to be practiced today. And that we need to be able to teach and learn and understand and argue in the courts both of these legal systems. And so, yeah, there's a really big movement, and it's landing really well at the moment. And we're drawing a lot of inspiration from Canada, what's happening there at UBC, University of Victoria, and a number of the other law schools around your recognition of Indigenous laws, and your federal government investment into the revitalisation of Indigenous laws. We find that very inspiring, and quite often putting in front of our ministers or our government some of these initiatives that are happening in Canada and saying, we need some of this as well. So it's an exciting time to be in the law, to be learning law and practicing law.
Well, I certainly agree with you there. Sorry?
Sorry, Dad, I'm going to cut you off there. I'm going to ask a question from the next panelist. I can't have a conflict of interest here. I'm going to move on to Vega Cardenas Yeni. She says, beautiful presentation from both panelists. I was wondering if we can have a word concerning the rights that have been granted to sturgeon Fraser River.
The rights that have been granted. Yeah, sorry, I'm not the person for that specifically. I'm more so on the knowledge of I guess spiritual relation, traditional law within our territory. I don't really have the most up-to-date knowledge on especially the Fraser River, more so Taiko Choco River. So unfortunately, yeah, I can't answer that.
From what I know as of right now, I don't actually think there are rights for the sturgeon or Fraser River. And Stefan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sorry.
Just very briefly, the references to the Eldako declaration that was issued by one of the member nations of the Sokotin national government around a year ago now. And it does briefly mention that the river is a being with rights. But yeah, I am not a person to speak about that either.
Yeah, that is right. That's by 2C. It would be by 2C and led by Chief Francis Lassis. And I think right now they're looking at action against Gibraltar Mines, who's you know, discharging mine waste into the Fraser River and looking that as being, you know, possibly that headway through that action. And so, yeah.
Next, we have a question from John Wagner. I have assigned readings on the Whanganui River Declaration to my students at UBC Okanagan, which we find inspirational and so very encouraging. But we wonder about what differences the declaration have made to activities in the Whanganui watershed. Is it too soon to expect tangible physical outcomes in respect to conservation, resource extraction activities, etc.?
Yeah, so great question. And I think it is too soon to really judge. It's going to take, it may take 3 generations. There's a whole intergenerational change that has to take place here. And we have to enable the Māori there to be able to, they're being re-empowered to decision make in a way that makes sense to them. And that's really exciting, but they need to be left alone to do that, I think, in many ways as well. And I think, I don't know, but the whole world, it feels as though I was sort of watching what's happening there. And so, look, I think it's going to take time to actually see the influence of that in a real way. Because that river is a very, it goes partly through a national park, but it also goes through a town. It's got a hydro dam on it. It's a highly utilized river. We're not talking about what is kind of remote, but it's not a really remote part of the country. People live alongside that river and make livelihoods from it. So look, it's going to take time. I do think the symbolic value of that has been enormous though, and it has normalized in a general population across this country that it's okay for Māori to talk about their ancestors in the river, in the lands, in the mountains. And it's really, and that normalization of a Māori worldview, a Māori belief, I think is just fundamental for the understanding of our society and the appreciation and respect. And through that, I hope that we have an opportunity to be able to build on that and build our relationships in a much more positive way. So I'm really excited about I don't dismiss the symbolism of it all.
Amazing. Next, we have a question from Robert Clifford to Jacinta. I understand that the return of land directly to the iwi was a bridge too far for the New Zealand government, and so the legal personhood tool was a compromise that was reached. My question is, do you see that as telling of anything in particular? And why do you think the tool of legal personhood was a bridge less far for the government? As a follow-up to that, what do you think the next steps or pushes would be in either moving beyond legal personhood, recognizing nothing is a perfect tool, or otherwise?
Yeah, great question. So look, the legal personality tool was particularly palatable to our government because it neutralized the issue of ownership. From a Tūhoe tribal perspective, Te Uruwera, it's their lands, it's who they are, it's their being. They wanted those lands returned to them. But the government wouldn't go that far. And so, exactly, it's just that legal personality, the legal rights has simply been a bridge, I suppose, or it's just simply been a useful tool. And that's why I don't tend to frame a lot of what's happened here in New Zealand in the context of rights of nature. That doesn't entirely make sense to me, the rights of nature movement, because from an Indigenous perspective, we're simply trying to reassert our knowledge ways, who we are as human beings, and our responsibilities to the lands and waters around us. And look, legal personality rights of nature has been a convenient tool to do that. But look, there could be many other ways. I mean, the land could have just been returned. The government wouldn't do that. So, yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Tabitha Ross. How do you see your role evolving in environmental protection? Can Western society learn from the teachings of Indigenous peoples?
Trevor, you might want to answer this one.
Well, so I think there is a way that in this process, there can be the greatest cultural exchange in Canadian history that can occur in this process, where the knowledge exchanged and communicated and transferred and shared can lead to songs, ceremonies that can be learned, dances that can be learned. So then the resonance, it's like we're singing one song and there's a whole nother song and we're kind of off key. And then our ancestors have kind of been like holding the key and kind of waiting. Okay, they're learning the ways, they're coming closer. And I think that can occur in a way where, when we're talking about traditional law, where does that come from, right? Where does that come from? Traditional law, universal law, natural law, where is it all coming from? It's coming from these tangible connections to the sacred, these tangible connections to the source that were shared through stories, shared through songs, dances. And so I think in order to begin to share that knowledge in a way that can be understood, right? Because sacred, it's like, okay, it can be written down, it could be there, but then the feeling has to be felt, right? The feeling of the sacred has to be felt. And I think that can occur in a way when we're talking about legalities and we're looking at the future of plant medicines and the legalities of plant medicines throughout the Western world, whether these medicines are mushrooms, peyote, ayahuasca, yopo. These are quickly becoming mainstream and contextualized in the Western colonial state. I'm an Indigenous advisor for the Psychedelic Association of Canada. And in the next 5, 10, 15 years, there are massive efforts and pushes for the legality of these medicines. But in what way are these medicines going to be used within our societies? Are they going to be prescribed and are going to be taken over by pharmaceutical companies? Or is it going to be Indigenous led? And is it going to be in a way that traditional laws can be learned within this process of protocols on how to use these medicines? Because universally, these medicines have been used to contact source, to speak with ancestors, to speak with spirit, to sing together, to dance together. And there are many ways. Plant medicines is just one way, right? There's fasting, there's Sundance, there's many different ways, and looking at a way where we can learn and create a legal framework to protect these medicines and have this movement be Indigenous led. We have 600 Indigenous communities. In 50 years, you're going to have youth who have grown up with the cultural exchange where we have, let's say, aspiring lawyers, psychedelic researchers, artists, and medicine carriers working together to bridge communities between the South and the North to share knowledge of these medicines and knowledge of traditional law and ceremony. And then what you have then is a movement that's beginning to learn about why these traditional laws exist, and it's coming from an experiential place. And then we're on the same wavelength of that experiential knowledge and feeling to then create new declarations. So then we go, I know what you're talking about when you say sacred being. I know what you're talking about. So then we're like, see, we've been, now you see. So I think there's great promise in this movement, this psychedelic renaissance and revolution that's happening to be Indigenous led. And that is going to lead to the knowledge transfer of why these places are sacred places. So then everybody in the circle can begin singing the same song. And then when we begin singing the same song, that's when the magic is created.
Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. So this is a question from Anna Lee. How could non-Indigenous environmental activists support the work of Indigenous efforts to have sacred places given legal rights? What sort of mindset or framework shifts would you like to see from the mainstream environmental movements?
Shall I just jump in here? Trevor, you might want to add too, but for me, I think this is where I was going to get to with He Puapua, this writing of the movement of making space for Māori leadership. So I think of our environmental activist groups who have a common meeting place with Indigenous peoples in some ways. If they can listen, hear and see the Indigenous peoples, if they can really make space for Indigenous peoples, not just to advise the environmental group on how best to care for the place, but to give the Indigenous peoples the pen to hold, to be able to write and dream how these places should be cared for and used and so on going forward. And so I really, my main message there is just to bring more Indigenous voices into you and be open to being challenged. And that there's for us here in New Zealand, a major biodiversity crisis going on. We're losing, most of our native flora and fauna has been lost or is at critical or endangered rate. And we know some of the solutions lie within the Māori world. And if we were brave enough as a country to listen to that Māori response for change, I know that we'd be making steps forward, walking on pathways with Western science as well, but really making in our hearts and minds more room for Indigenous leadership and giving much more control over to Indigenous peoples, I think is something that we ought to be more brave to do.
Yeah, I'd echo what you're saying, your wisdom, Jacinta. It's almost that time for humility, that time for, wait a second, there may be people who know more who may know more than us, and then to be like, because learning comes from humility, right? We can only learn if we're humble about being, you know what? Wow, I was wrong, or I didn't know everything there. And that's what we have elders, we have teachers. And so, we always have to be in a place of openness to learn, and an openness and an openness to adapt, and an openness to be like, wow, okay, I was wrong. And when we begin to do that on an individual level, about our preconceived notions of a people, about our preconceived notions of a culture, of a society, then it becomes easier and easier. And I think when we're able to, that's what healing is, right? And so I think when we're looking at the collaboration of non-Indigenous people and Indigenous peoples, we're in a place of healing our people right now. And so if we begin to see that, in, like I was mentioning earlier, in 50 years, in 600 Indigenous communities, you will have parents who will have children growing up with the collective help from society to begin to heal for, the governance, decision making, for contracting, and for ceremony. Then if you times that by 600, you're going to have incredibly strong communities who have, renewed, tangible connections to source. And then through that, these logs will be enacted, and through that, new declarations will be made, where there will be more sustained stewardship for the remaining biodiversity on the planet. And it's like, okay, hey, we have people who know about managing and stewarding land. We should start listening. Okay, so yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came today from near and far across different worlds and oceans. And it's been a pleasure to spend the last hour with all of you. So, Stefan?
I'll just close by repeating those thanks to our two wonderful speakers and to everyone who joined us. And just to note for everyone who's still with us that you should watch our website. It's allard.ubc.ca/CLE for announcements about the next webinar. And in February, on February 16th, if all goes well, we're going to hold an in-person all-day workshop with Mari Margill, pioneer in the movement for recognition of non-human entities as persons, who will lead a workshop on essentially practical options, tools, and strategies for moving ideas like this forward. So watch our website, and thank you everybody very much once again. Goodbye.